I have heard a lot of bizarre claims from Andrea Dworkin over the years, all of them blissfully removed from anything that could be considered factual or even remotely grounded in reality. To read Andrea Dworkin is to be immersed in the blood-stained chamber of her psyche, a world of hatred and vitriol where blind, random assertions are true so long as they are delivered with enough raving hysteria. Such claims include, for example, the assertion that the titular character in the story of O commits suicide in the end. Despite an unresolved ending, O is still alive at the end of the novel, and if that's not good enough for you, there's a sequel, and yes, she's alive at the end of that as well. Or perhaps there was her claim that childbirth is glorified in part because women die from it. Or what about when she said that men, all men, believe that they have the right to commit rape, even if they don't know it? It's difficult on the surface to understand how Andrea Dworkin would come to these conclusions, and just as we cannot easily dismiss her as being insane, so we cannot validate her as being sane either. Though it is a long, twisting path into the mind of the late Andrea Dworkin, we might be able to clear a path through the dense and dark foliage if we look closely and examine her central work, Intercourse. Through the course of my ongoing analysis of prominent figures in the anti-porn lobby, I have noted time and again that Dworkin's most ardent supporters, such as Gail Dines and Robert Jensen, seem to hail her as some sort of irrefutable prophet, as though citing her brilliance is in and of itself enough to lay anyone else's arguments flat, and if you disagree, well, you're obviously a sexist pig. Furthermore, they treat their discovery of her work as some sort of profound personal revelation akin to a religious awakening. Both of these are signs not of sound academic research, but of fanatical adherence to the leader of a cult. Intercourse is unique in that it relies almost exclusively on references to famous works of literature to back up its points. Assertions are made about then hateful, sadistic, sociopathic manner in which men view women, and are subsequently supported by references to the works of Leo Tolstoy, Kobo Abe, Tennessee Williams, and many others. I found it bizarre that these fictional citations were touted as somehow demonstrating something about how men do in fact see women. It carries all of the weight of saying that juvenile delinquents are actually misunderstood intellectuals and using A Clockwork Orange and the Basketball Diaries as my sources. Intercourse contains 501 citations, only 83 of which do not reference works of fiction. That means that only 16.5% of the arguments made in Intercourse are substantiated by something other than Dworkin's own opinion, and of those citations, many are either references to essays by other feminists or minutiae-like dictionary definitions of words. So of those 83, only the 35 citations regarding the life of Joan of Arc and a few others actually carry any legitimacy at all. That takes us to, at best, an 8% success rate with the validity of Dworkin's sources. Ariel Levi offers this explanation in her foreword to the work. Quote, "There is the Bible to teach us this, of course, but then there is also Tolstoy, Freud, Mailer, and so on. From these texts, Dworkin extracts the belief system we know, but sometimes like to forget, has governed gender relations in the West throughout the course of history, that women are entities to be taken and possessed, walking, talking currency." And what exactly determined that these works of literature and Andrea's interpretation of them were the correct ones? Nothing. At best, it could be argued that the works are enduringly popular, but that is simply argumentum ad populum, the fallacious assumption that a belief is true simply because it is widely held. In her introduction, Dworkin offers this explanation. Quote, "Intercourse does not narrate my experience to measure it against Norman Mailer's or D.H. Lawrence's. The first person is embedded in the way the book is built. I use Tolstoy, Kobo Abe, James Baldwin, Tennessee Williams, Isaac Bashevis, Singer, Flaubert, and not as authorities, but as examples. I use them, I cut and slice into them in order to exhibit them. But the authority behind the book, behind each and every choice, is mine. In formal terms, then, Intercourse is arrogant, cold, and remorseless. You, the reader, will not be looking at me, the girl. You will be looking at them. In Intercourse, I created an intellectual and imaginative environment in which you can see them. The very fact that I usurp their place, make them my characters, lessens the unexamined authority that goes not with their art but with their gender. I love the literature these men created, but I will not live my life as if they are real and I am not, nor will I tolerate the continuing assumption that they know more about women than we know about ourselves. And I do not believe that they know more about intercourse. Habits of difference can be broken, and it's up to writers to break them. Submission can be refused, and I refuse it. The illogical idiocy of Dworkin's collectivist thinking is on full display here. She assumes that her own admittedly traumatized experience with sexual intercourse is common to all women, and that having an overwhelmingly negative experience with something makes her an expert by default. But even so, there is something more damning about all of this. The foundation of her argument is ultimately anecdotal evidence. Why does Dworkin know better than all other women what sexual intercourse means to women? Because she says so. Why does she know better what sexual intercourse means to all men better than all men? Because she says so. This would be enough to dismiss her arguments outright, but in the interest of full analysis, let us delve into the lunatic hysteria of this woman's misguided ravings, chapter by chapter. The first chapter is nothing but fiction references buttressed by examples of how the authors of these works behaved like assholes to the women in their own lives. There's nothing factual or even substantial in the way of an argument, but it does set the tone of the work. We are to imagine men as seething, red-faced brutes who relish nothing more than gnashing their teeth in sadistic glee as they beat and rape one woman after another, while women lay on the floor in the living room, the scattered remnants of a dinner not quite properly prepared scattered all over the rug around them as they weep and plead for mercy. I want to say something here. This situation does exist. I have witnessed it firsthand and live with the regret that I did not do more to stop it. I am not denying that this horrible, vicious relationship between a man and a woman exists. However, the insanity of Dworkin's position, asserting that women are the losing army in a war against an overpowering male force that consciously and intentionally conspires to keep women subjugated, is itself no more connected to reality than the fiction she uses as her sources. In Chapter 2, Dworkin continues the absurd fiction as truth angle, but finally begins to make some claims of her own about men. That men cannot stand to be naked unless they are in the presence of a naked woman, that men look at naked women and are conflicted about the acts of violence they want to commit, that men are so self-absorbed that they see women's nakedness as their only connection to reality, that sex is inherently degrading, that men only see as deep as the skin during sex. Chapter 3 asserts that human beings are marked by sex and describes a convoluted inner conflict she thinks all people supposedly have. She then continues using works of fiction as proof and spends an extended period analyzing the psychology of Stanley Kowalski in Streetcar Named Desire, apparently implying that this is how men see sex. I'm sure some Dworkinite out there is straining at the keyboard to try to explain how these universally negative examples of masculinity constitute the truth of manhood. Hell, some have probably already commented by now that my failure to get in line with Dworkin's raving just proves that I'm too blinded by male privilege to understand what Dworkin is saying on a gut level the way women do. All I can say to that is that it shows your prejudice and bigotry, not mine. Also, why is the truth of manhood only revealed in savage, brutish behavior? Does she really expect a sane, rational reader not to think of the countless examples of noble, heroic, intelligent, and sensitive behavior from men? What about King Arthur or Sherlock Holmes or Robin Hood or Philip Pirrip or any other likable characters? Instead, only depictions of men as vile scum are valid. Why? Because Andrea Dworkin was raped and beaten a lot, so that means all men are as bad as the ones she encountered, and if you don't agree, then you're somehow the one with the problem. In Chapter 4, Dworkin asserts that the left and the right are both pro-sex and that the issue is whether or not sex should be had out of marriage. This alone is certainly a valid observation, but it begins to frame the larger context of her argument that nowhere in the socio-political spectrum is there any party that is advocating for women to be free from sexual intercourse altogether. She argues that Hustler's Meat Grinder magazine cover is emblematic of how the left views sex, but offers nothing to back up this claim. She further elaborates on the idea that both the left and the right are oppressive to women because both assume that women want to have sex. But then she throws down a straw man so utterly bizarre that I actually stopped, looked away from the book for a minute, and then read the passage again. She actually declares that critiques of, quote, rape, pornography, and prostitution, close quote, are dismissed as being sex negative. Seriously, she thinks opposition to rape makes people be written off as sex negative. The only genuinely pro-rape voice I'm aware of is John Norman, but beyond that, who in the hell is saying that you're sex negative if you're anti-rape? Well, as we will see, Dworkin is trying to make the argument that sexual intercourse, meaning penis in vagina, or PIV as the drones on the internet say, is rape, full stop. This is where we get into a matter of semantics. She's not saying all sex is rape, just that vaginal intercourse is rape. When I came to understand what she was actually defining as rape, it became clear to me why her speech, "I want a 24-hour truce during which there is no rape," says that men believe they have the right to commit rape even if they don't realize it. Men want vaginal intercourse, and apparently women don't. So, therefore, what men oh so foolishly think of as sex is actually rape. And it's for that reason that all the ignorant, unenlightened men of the world think that she's saying that all sex is rape. And just to show that there's nothing new under the sun, she argues that genuine sexual imagination has been replaced with programmed repetition, an argument that Gail Dines belches up in modern times to describe the porn industry as a homogenized assembly line product. She then gets lost in the fiction and essays of James Baldwin, saying, quote, "The value of the fiction and the essays are very much the same." In Chapter 5, she asserts that sex is an act of dominance and control by men by its very nature and cites fiction as proof. She then asserts that even though men fear castration from the vagina, they want to fuck anyway because of an innate compulsion, and for this reason, they have to treat intercourse as an act of conquering. The idea of forming a psychological template around the realization that one's genitalia is fundamentally different from that of the opposite sex is a Freudian concept that's always stuck in the craw of feminists, and yes, she references Freud directly. Freud believed that in child development, a girl learns at some point that she does not have a penis and comes to desire the power that the phallus represents because, like the boy, she wants to have sex with her mother, but comes to realize that she is ill-equipped and compensates by trying to replace her mother as her father's love, but realizing that this is also impossible, projects the template of her father onto other men, thus establishing the psychological motivation that will drive her adult romantic and sexual relationships. A trademark of radical feminist literature that I have noticed time and again throughout my research is that they continually declare the opposite of Freud's theories to be true in an unsupported and angry, spiteful manner. A great example of this is in the SCUM Manifesto by Valerie Solanas, in which she declares, with absolutely no evidence, that misogyny comes from men realizing that they are actually incomplete women and hating the fact that women represent all of the positive qualities of the human race that they as men cannot achieve. So they compensate by oppressing women and pretending to have all of the noble virtues that women have. This line of thinking reveals a great deal about how radical feminists see ideas and information that run contrary to their own. Freud's ideas are not, in their eyes, viewed as legitimate answers to legitimate questions, but rather a sort of hateful, malicious insult designed to keep women subordinated. Any idea that does not conform to theirs, even if it was presented long before their pseudo-scientific raving was published, is an act of the patriarchy to keep women down. Talk about having a hammer and seeing every problem as a nail. I'm reminded of the popular meme picture of Anita Sarkeesian untangling Christmas lights with a caption that says, "I bet the patriarchy did this." Freud's ideas, though highly influential, are not above criticism, and they have certainly drawn legitimate disagreement from psychologists, but at the end of the day, Freud's intention was to explain the psychological mechanism that causes boys and girls to become adults that seek out certain types of relationships, and the purpose of this knowledge was to help people deal with their neuroses and live happier lives free of psychological baggage, not to maintain some evil system of male dominance. Dworkin's evidence-free assertions continue as she asserts that men experience coitus as death but remain oblivious to what they're experiencing. She asserts that women being accused of witchcraft was simply men's way of accusing women of rape and provides no proof of this. She claims that women's ability to arouse men was the reason that they were slaughtered in the Inquisition, but claims this was something fundamental to men, ignoring the reality that the Inquisition slaughtered men and women on the basis of religious fanaticism. At this point, Dworkin finally comes right out and declares that men's possession of women through sexual intercourse is the basis for all of women's social, political, psychological, and economic subjugation. It is worth noting that while she provides no evidence to support this claim, it is this idea that distinguishes radical feminism from all other forms of feminism. Dworkin then closes out the chapter by asserting that women have no sexual identity outside of men, and then uses the novel Satan and Gore as proof that Jewish Old Testament religious fanaticism resulted in widespread hedonism, not sexual repression. In Chapter 6, we finally see some small modicum of scholarship in Dworkin's citations about the life of Joan of Arc, but these citations only demonstrate that Joan of Arc said and did the things that Dworkin is claiming, not that her interpretation is correct. Dworkin's long-winded analysis of St. Joan ultimately comes to the conclusion that she, Joan of Arc, had hit on true sexual freedom. Abstinence. She wore men's clothes and abstained from sex, to hear Dworkin tell it, not because she thought she was on a mission from God, but because she sought to be free from the horrors of intercourse. This prompts Dworkin to launch into a tirade about how men have tricked women into thinking that sexual freedom meant being sexually available to men at all times. In this patriarchal culture, only abstinence is sexual freedom. But the hallucinatory logic only gets worse. She tries to argue that a man who had a white light experience similar to Joan of Arc's was not tried for heresy, but rather acclaimed by society. The man in question was Gustave Flaubert, and so Dworkin, in a mind-boggling display of cross-eyed nuttiness, begins trying to compare the real-life experiences of Joan of Arc to the fictional account of Madame Bovary. It's bad enough that she thinks works of fiction serve as a citation source, but now she's actually moved into a mindset that sees reality and imagination land as equally comparable sources of validity. Even more hilarious is that she says Flaubert's experience happened a mere 412 years after Joan of Arc, as if to say that 4 centuries is not enough time for any real improvements in social attitudes. She then bemoans having to consider the current world as contemporaneous to D.H. Lawrence, despite the fact that he was born in 1885. Dworkin was born 16 years after Lawrence died, and Intercourse was published 57 years after his death. Apparently, that's too long a time span for two people to be considered contemporaneous, but 412 years is not. Dworkin closes out this chapter with another epic doozy, declaring that the reason people think oral sex, which she calls throat rape, is considered an acceptable practice is because of the widespread popularity of Count Dracula. as a literary figure. Bram Stoker's character apparently also accounts for the popularity of killing and mutilating women as a source of sexual satisfaction. Predictably, there is no evidence provided linking Dracula to any of this, and no evidence provided to say that there is widespread popularity in killing and mutilating women, or a widespread belief that women will remain virgins in the eyes of men until they have been made to bleed. By chapter 7, Dworkin is fully espousing her morbid, sadistic view of intercourse and female anatomy. She describes sexual intercourse as something that by nature results in woman being, quote, opened up, split down the center, occupied physically, internally, in her privacy. She tries to assert that a woman's body is without corporeal solidness because of the act of sex. She then states that violation is a synonym for intercourse, and therefore men see it as appropriate to violate the boundaries of a woman's body. She's trying to make sexual assault a matter of linguistics. In reality, the word intercourse dates back to the mid-15th century and is derived from the Old French Intercourse, which means communication to and fro. I consulted 2 dictionaries and a thesaurus, and none of them suggested that violation was a synonym for intercourse. The thesaurus did, however, list the antonyms for the various definitions of intercourse. They were concealment, cover, quiet, suppression, withholding, antagonism, contention, disagreement, discord, disunity, division, hostility, variance. It sounds as if violation would more properly be an antonym for intercourse. But what Dworkin is doing here is far more vile. Just as Christian apologists will try to prove the existence of God by defining him into existence, so Dworkin is trying to prove that all men rape when they have sexual intercourse as a matter of definition. It would be like saying that baseball players are guilty of criminal theft every time they steal a base. Nevertheless, Dworkin asserts without evidence that there is widespread societal recognition of this definition. She then declares that women have no bodily autonomy because the vagina is understood as something to be entered. This is every bit as valid as saying that men have no property rights because the penis is understood to be something that is given away and maliciously absorbed into the body of another. She argues that women are unique as an oppressed group because they're made for intercourse. Well, men are made for intercourse too, Andrea, or had you forgotten? Dworkin points to a study that says only 3 out of every 10 women regularly experience orgasm from intercourse. So are we supposed to assume then that her arguments are only valid 70% of the time? Dworkin then tries to argue that because of intercourse and the culture that supposedly springs from it, all men have social, economic, physical, and political power over all women, even though individual women may be more powerful than individual men. Argues that a woman cannot, quote, exist before or during the act as a fully realized, existentially alive individual, close quote, because she has to look at it a certain way and be a certain type of woman for a man to want to have sex with her. So apparently if men have standards, they're oppressing women by default. She asserts that women want to have a, quote, more diffuse and tender sensuality that involves the whole body and a polymorphous tenderness, close quote, as if men only want the vagina and nothing else. Dworkin calls for, quote, less romanticizing of rape, at least as an articulated social goal, close quote, but provides no evidence or references to what the bat fuck she's talking about. Who is actually holding up rape as a social goal? Oh, right. Intercourse is rape, but as a man, I just can't understand that. I mean, silly me thinking all this time that it wasn't rape if the woman consented. Then she uses another classic radical feminist lie, one that seems to have originated with her and is pushed today by Gail Dines, aka Dworkin 2.0. To quote directly, women have wanted intercourse to be, for a woman, an experience of equality and passion, sensuality and intimacy. Women have a vision of love that includes men as human too, and women want the human in men, including the act of intercourse. Even without the dignity of equal power, women have believed in the redeeming potential of love. There has been, despite the cruelty of exploitation and forced sex, a consistent vision for women as of a sexuality based on a harmony that is both sensual and possible. Even without the dignity of equal power, women have believed in the redeeming potential of love. I reread the same line again. A consistent vision for women of sexuality based on a harmony that is both sensual and possible. In the words of sex reformer Ellen Key, she will no longer be captured like a fortress or hunted like a quarry, nor will she be a placid lake awaiting the stream that seeks its way to her embrace. A stream herself, she will go her own way to meet the other stream. A stream herself, she would move over the earth, sensual and equal. Especially, she will go her own way. Sherry Height has suggested that an intercourse in which, quote, thrusting would not be considered as necessary as it now is. There might be a more mutual lying together in pleasure, penis and vagina covering penis, with the female orgasm providing much of the stimulation necessary for male orgasm. These visions of a humane sensuality based on equality are in the aspirations of women, and even the nightmare of sexual inferiority does not kill them. They are not searching analyses into the nature of intercourse. They are instead deep, humane dreams that repudiate the rapist as the final arbiter of reality. They are an underground resistance to both inferiority and brutality, visions that sustain life and further endurance. They also do not amount to much in real life with real men. There is instead the cold, fucking, duty-bound, promiscuous, the romantic obsession in which eventual abandonment turns the vagina into the wound Freud claimed it was. Intimacy with men who dread women, coital dread, as Kafka wrote in his diary, coitus as a punishment for the happiness of being together. Fear, too, has a special power to change experience and compromise any possibility of freedom. A stream does not know fear, a woman does. Especially women know fear of men, of forced intercourse. Consent in this world of fear is so passive that the woman consenting could be dead, and sometimes is. This is a close quote. This is a classic rad femme lie. The lie that women want to love men but can't because men aren't yet capable of loving and need to be enlightened. This is not social science. This is not a call for any reform of attitudes that actually exist. This is simply recruitment for a religion. O ye shameful sinners, ye men who know nothing of sex or love save for your raping desires, come, let us brave and noble goddesses grant you salvation when you kneel before us and confess your unholy lifestyle. It should come as no surprise that the only men who seem to get on board with this trash are rinky-dink submissives like Jensen and Wasnitzer. But anyway, in works like The Antichrist and Beyond Good and Evil, Friedrich Nietzsche argued that religion is a means by which the weak conquer and subjugate the strong through the use of guilt and shame. This is precisely what we see when radical feminists from Dworkin to Dines hold out the supposed olive branch to men. And no, I am not saying that men are strong and women are weak. I am saying that mystics, whether they be those of the Pat Robertson variety or the Andrea Dworkin variety, are fundamentally weak individuals who, being the parasites that they are too weak in their character to live for their own sake, and as such feed off of the strong. Dworkin then attempts to justify her position by referring to the case of a man that killed a woman to fuck her dead body, and how the courts ruled that the murder was not committed in such a way as to inflict prolonged pain on the victim. She then asks, "Are you afraid now?" The case in question was the case of the State v. Hunt, and despite the court ruling out that one particular factor of Robert E. Hunt Jr. was convicted and sentenced to death in Nebraska. I cannot confirm whether he is still alive or not, but his appeal has been turned down as recently as 2001. It would seem that justice has been served, but Dworkin is still not happy, despite the state handing down the most severe punishment possible. Or perhaps she was hoping that her readers wouldn't check the sources and not look for any additional information on the case. She claims that women should have the authority and control of the act of sex, and that the consent standard is pallid, weak, stupid, and second class. She justifies this with the writings of Victoria Woodhull. Further asserts that women are anatomically incapable of raping men, so women having full authority over sex is equality, not supremacy. Well, as Nina Hartley pointed out, women already are in control of sex, because if they say no, it becomes illegal. Cue radical feminists screeching about how horrible it is that men accused of rape are given due process before the bar of law. Dworkin argues that because medical technology makes conception possible without copulation, intercourse is no longer necessary to existence, but continues because of male hatred. I've seen this argument on the now defunct hate site Radical Hub as part of their brutal opposition to the horror of penis in vagina sex. She then throws in another red herring about pornography stopping intercourse from being seen as one sex act among many as part of other, quote, deeper, longer, more sensual lovemaking, close quote. Exactly what are we referring to when we say one among many? Oral sex is out. I'm guessing butt sex is too. It seems like all we're left with is sitting around circle jerking, something which Dworkin's academic proselytizers are already indulge in at the intellectual level. My regular viewers should know that by now there is pornography that reflects any of the acts Dworkin might want to advocate. Cue radical feminists screeching about how pornography does not advocate those types of sexual practices, but rather absorbs them into patriarchy. In Chapter 8, Dworkin tries to make her case that many laws about sex are laws demanding sexual compliance, especially from women, close quote. What laws, you ask? Oh, well, the sodomy laws, for one thing. Yes, that's right. Sodomy laws were put in place to keep women subjugated. By making every other orifice on the body off limits, it ensures that men will only go to the vagina for their sexual gratification, therefore maintaining that horrible act which keeps women down. Dworkin then argues that rape laws from the Old Testament all the way up to the 17th century were intended to protect the woman's rights, not the woman's rights, but the property rights of men. Well, that's certainly true, but in the 400 or so years since then, we've made a remarkable amount of progress as a species, and now developed first world countries like the United States have rape laws which honor the violation of the rape victim as a human being, not the damage of a man's property. The final chapter is particularly disturbing. Dealing with dirt and death, Dworkin goes back to the Old Testament to show how in ancient times the vagina was regarded as something dirty and filthy, and from this springs forth all of the ideas related to women being dirty, i.e. that sex is dirty, or that pornography is referred to as dirty movies. The problem with this is that the same Old Testament doctrine that espouses this also lays out circumstances under which the male genitalia is also unclean, such as in ejaculation or just after circumcision. Those laws were put in place for the sake of a society which had no concept of hygiene or sanitation, and while it is extremely likely that much of it is at the heart of why sex is viewed as filthy, her case that it is something that results exclusively from disgust at the woman's genitals is simply a lie by omission. The climax of Intercourse, no pun intended, is Dworkin's raving hysteria about how we all hate our genitals, and it is because of that hatred that we view intercourse as symbolically associated with death, and that men hate women because intercourse is associated with dirt, which is associated with death. How does Dworkin come to this conclusion? It doesn't matter. She offers no evidence to substantiate her argument, instead relying on vicious, gut-wrenching imagery to drive her point home. Finally, she concludes the book thusly. The men, as a body politic, have power over women and decide how women will suffer, which sadistic acts the bodies of women will be construed as normal. which sadistic acts against the bodies of women will be construed as normal. In the United States, incest is increasingly the sadism of choice, the intercourse itself wounding the female child and socializing her to her female status. Early, perhaps a sexual response to the political rebellion of adult women, a tyranny to destroy the potential for rebellion. Quote, I felt like I was being ripped up the middle of my legs all the way to my throat, one incest victim said. Close quote. I was sure that if I opened my eyes and looked down, I would be in two parts on the bed. Close quote. This, too, is genital mutilation, with the penis doing the cutting. Perhaps incestuous rape is becoming a central paradigm for intercourse in our time. Women are supposed to be small and childlike in looks, in rights. Child prostitution keeps increasing in mass and in legitimacy. The children sexually used by a long chain of men, fathers, uncles, grandfathers, brothers, pimps, pornographers, and the good citizens who are the consumers, and men who are, after all, just family, are supposed to slice us up the middle, leaving us in parts on the bed. End of quote. Throughout Intercourse, Dworkin has been subjecting women to a series of increasingly sadistic acts of sexual violence that ultimately culminate finally in dismemberment and death. The book ends full stop on that metaphorical note. When I read this final section, it occurred to me how much the book reminded me of Mel Gibson's Passion of the Christ. The focus of that film simply was just to show Jesus being tortured in the final days of his life and nothing more. Yet somehow many Christians were exclaiming about how this glorified snuff film reaffirmed or strengthened their faith. The same is true here. All that has happened in the course of this book is that women were shown as being tortured and slaughtered in a sick and sadistic manner with a bunch of fictitious citations to justify why Dworkin's fictitious worldview constitutes reality. And we're supposed to glean something profound from that. This childish, depraved, and utterly morbid fascination with the genitalia of one's gender is nothing more than glorified navel-gazing, and this asinine screed is nothing more than the mental masturbation of a very sick mind. This book does nothing to bolster the cause of equal rights for women, it does nothing to combat sexual assault, and it does nothing to enhance the academic integrity of feminism. It is simply an invitation to become more hateful and more cynical. I was once roped into a Facebook group chat by a couple of extreme feminists. After I stated my views and defended them, one of them replied that what I'd said was proof that I was a misogynist. I asked for an explanation why anything I had said was at all misogynistic, because it wasn't, and one of them replied that my thinking I was entitled to an explanation was itself proof that I was a misogynist. And no, they weren't trolls, they were totally serious. Later, I tried to cite examples of my doing right by women, such as intervening when I saw teenage boys hit their girlfriends when I was growing up. The reply was, I'm not kidding, quote, you can like women and still be a misogynist. At that point, I officially stopped caring if anyone called me a misogynist. That is the effect that this book had on me. It gave me nothing to think about, it simply alienated me, and the author declared from the outset that its ability to alienate validated it as true. Any man or woman with any degree of self-respect should similarly roll their eyes at Dworkin's nonsense. It is telling that I have never actually gotten any real defense of Dworkin's views from her supporters. Instead, I'm repeatedly subjected to one vicious insult after another from Dworkin's supporters who tell me that I just don't understand her writing, or that I'm ugly, or that they could explain it to me, but it's not worth their time. Take, for example, some of the comments from my video series, Andrea Dworkin, The Lies and the Lunacy. Layli LaBelle writes, Dear Jordan, please stop. Just stop now. You clearly cannot comprehend the depth of Miss Dworkin's argument, and your futile attempts to deconstruct her testimonies are quite comical. You are embarrassing yourself. Please get out of your bathrobe, clean yourself up, and stop pretending like you understand feminism. Don't worry, buddy. Despite the validity of Dworkin's critique, you can still love the ladies by wanking off to your precious porn collection. EMSX0XX writes, "You're criticizing the way she looks because society tells women to look a certain way in order to please a man, which is part of the problem against women, not because, quote, pretty girls get more attention. This is the only argument you have against her? Please. Men don't have to deal with this type of criticism because society values them more. You're an ugly motherfucker too anyway, so you shouldn't even talk." Just instantly off the script, I did respond to that saying that men, there are absolutely standards by which men are expected to look, to please other men, to please women. Those are absolutely out there in the world, and it is for that reason that characters like Peter Griffin and Eric Cartman and Homer Simpson are made fun of for their appearance. The difference is that men, at least as far as I can tell, don't sit around whining about how society has beauty standards they can't live up to. Anyway, Liam T 2008 writes, "You are so far behind in time, it is obvious you are a troll." Felicia 1717 writes, "I know Andrea. Now the only honest reason I can think that you're attacking her is because you run a porn shop whose business might have gotten affected by her objections, or you don't like feminism. Other than that, you wouldn't have taken the time to put up this video. Seriously, I've yet to hear anyone scorning her to have humane intentions. She was primarily looking after women who were being abused. That's it. Are you doing the same? I would think not. Just having fun with people who do." I reminded her that Andrea Dworkin was dead, so she knew Andrea if she knew her at all. But anyway, so she responds, Felicia 1717 says, "I know she passed away. I just knew her in literature and talks. Feminism is trying to hold back idiots like you from doing women harm. Not here to justify every group, but that's part of the objective. At its core, it's about setting women free. You and many other chauvinists around here just can't see that. All you see is your superiority fading, and that's what really pisses you off. Other men, not women, are the real threat to you. Read the stats. It's all there in plain English." Kendall Sarah writes, "Fuck off, you unattractive, impotent bastard, and no, we're not going to waste time giving counter-arguments to a douche like you. I will, however, give thoughtful and productive arguments to my professors at Pacific Lutheran University. Not you, though. Have fun making minimum wage, cunt." I forwarded that comment to the grievances board at Pacific Lutheran University. They apologized to me on her behalf and said they would address the matter. The Glittering Prize says, "Christ, you are a fucking moron." L1 Vado 1 says, "Your seriousness in relation to debating a woman who only 0.5% of the population even knows about, who is dead, somehow amuses me. Your usage of a cat as a semantic stand-in further reinforces my suspicion that you are in fact a lovable nerd who works in IT and is afraid of talking to girls. Call me." Something I can't pronounce that starts with a Q says, "God, it's always so pathetic to see porn-loving men running around trying to defend pornography even in the face of what millions of women tell them it is. Fuck you, all you are the biggest assholes ever. It's men like you who permit atrocities to happen to women and girls everywhere." Anna Perform Art says, "Another dude who skimmed Cliff Notes tries to refute Dworkin, fails miserably, and ends up sounding like a total idiot. Same shit, different day. YouTube." Kimon Freeman writes, "Whenever I search Andrea Dworkin on YouTube, I have to see your ugly pug face. I thought you were her at first, which only added to the disappointment of this dull, pseudo-informative video. You remind me of the guy whose opinion does not matter outside of sounding clever to a woman who is more likely to fuck him. Listening to you speak of women's issues is an insult to my gender's integrity, as you have no idea what you are talking about, nor do you have the bodily function to speak on women's behalf, you fucking opportunist." What bodily function do I need to speak on women's behalf? Also, I wasn't claiming to speak on women's behalf or anybody's behalf. Bodily function. Anyway, and that's just from one video. And don't think for a minute that I'm trying to rally support a la Anita Sarkeesian. I'm not closing off my comments and then opening them up as troll bait. This is literally the only type of response I've ever received from fans of Andrea Dworkin. So please, Dworkinites, set me right. Tell me what exactly makes Dworkin's arguments in Intercourse valid, factual, and convincing. It should be so simple. If your arrogant grandstanding is any indication, you should have no trouble explaining all this to a simple, ignorant plebeian such as myself. If the gaps in my understanding are so vast, then you should have no trouble putting me to shame. Try it. I dare you. You never know, I just might see the light and come over to your side after all. But if all you can do is come up with a series of personal insults, accusations of depravity, and sexist aspersions that I am simply unable to understand Intercourse because I'm a man, then I will have to come to the conclusion that you are nothing more than the acolytes of a cult that is as bloated and stinking as the remains of its founder. In the foreword to Intercourse, it is pointed out that in her office, Dworkin sat under a poster which declared, "Dead men don't rape." Keep that in mind the next time your supposedly progressive sociology professor assigns one of her books as required reading.